As businesses around the world buckle in and brace themselves for the impact that the coronavirus pandemic will have on their operations, proper crisis management has become a necessity for company leadership. Yet only 54% of companies have a crisis plan in place. One of the most important actions that business leaders can take in the event of a global crisis event like COVID-19 is to quickly implement a plan to communicate company-wide updates. That's why Beekeeper prepared a general list of internal communication tips to help you effectively communicate with your team during a crisis situation. Download Beekeeper's free crisis communications checklist today at www.beekeeper.io/crisisavertedpodcast. That's www.beekeeper.io/crisisavertedpodcast. Welcome to the Crisis Averted Podcast, produced by CJ Media Solutions. I'm your host, CJ Arlotta. In this episode, I speak with Sara Potler LaHayne, founder and CEO of Move This World. During our conversation, she explains why social emotional learning is more important today than ever before and reveals how her organization helps students better engage and express themselves in the classroom and in life. Feel free to send me your feedback at cj@cjmediasolutionsllc.com. Oh, and if you're listening to the Crisis Averted podcast on Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating, review, or both. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Sara, thanks for coming on the Crisis Averted podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So for listeners who aren't familiar with you, Sara, mind telling us a little bit about your background and what you're up to now?
So I am the founder and CEO of Move This World. Move This World strengthens the mental, emotional, and social well-being of students, educators, and families through multimedia experiences. And I actually started this work as a Fulbright scholar in Bogota, Colombia, 14 years ago. I was working with a research team that was trying to help figure out bullying in schools and mediate conflict in schools. And the way this research team was going about this work is that teachers were standing behind desks and they were lecturing about self and social awareness and emotional identification and management. And we were looking at diagrams about diversity appreciation. And as you can imagine, students were totally disengaged. This was going right over their heads. They were slouched in their chairs. They were looking at their watches and the clock on the wall. But at the same time, they were dancing to reggaeton music in the schoolyard in this fun, inclusive, and participatory way. And I thought, how can we use this vehicle of movement and expression that is so personal to me? I am a dancer and I grew up in a family of artists. My mom is a dancer. She's still dancing. My dad is a songwriter who plays the guitar and the piano. So I thought, how can we use this vehicle of movement and expression to cultivate the same evidence-based social, emotional, and civic skills that we're developing in the classroom? And that's where the Move This World movement and curriculum was born 14 years ago in Bogota, Colombia.
How has the organization changed over the years?
It's changed quite a bit. So when I returned from Colombia to the US, I was delivering this work in a direct service capacity. So we were recruiting trainers who would go into classrooms, who would facilitate a direct service curriculum with students in 1-hour sessions once a week. And we realized very soon, one, that this model was not scalable. If we wanted to reach, today we've reached 1.5 million students. In order for us to have reached 1.5 million students with that model, we would have to recruit, train, hire, and support hundreds of thousands of facilitators. It just wasn't scalable. Two is that we realized when we delivered it in this way of just parachuting into a community, delivering a 1-hour session and leaving, it didn't stick. We would just show up for an hour and then we'd leave. We needed this work to be consistent, to be a daily practice of the operating plan of how teachers run their classrooms. And so it needed to be more baked into the day-to-day. And then three, we realized that that wasn't our core competency. We were deploying trainers who were not classroom teachers, who were artists and facilitators and graduate students. And classroom teachers know their students best. So we then evolved to a train-the-trainer model where we supported teachers to do this work for themselves in classrooms. And then from that moment, teachers would say to us, okay, this is great. We understand the importance of social emotional learning. We play, we laugh, we cry, we connect, but now what? And that's when we really made the transition to a media company where we moved toward producing bite-sized nuggets of content that could be used to anchor the instructional day and these instructional moments. And we started by just disaggregating and unbundling our evidence-based curriculum, filming these little kernels of content on our phones, and then emailing them to teachers. And they said, yes, thank you. That's exactly what we were looking for. And fast forward today, we have a production team and a production company that we work with to shoot hundreds of short form video and audio content every year.
Now, Sarah, could you talk a little bit about the history of social emotional learning? And was that something that, you mentioned the story about your organization. Did you go and learn more about that? Was that around during the same time period when you were creating the organization? And how did that work?
Well, when I was in Bogota, I think that many of the folks back here in the US were thinking, oh, Sarah, she's doing this hippy dippy, crunchy, kumbaya work of, soft skills and non-cognitive skills and non-IQ competencies. And even the way that those skills are labeled as non-cognitive skills is very demeaning. It's just diminishing them into something that they're not, as opposed to something that they are. And that was 14 years ago. And there's been this evolution in the field of social emotional learning from something that's considered wishy-washy and crunchy and kumbaya to something that is integral and critical for educating the whole child. And recognizing that if we don't have the skills to identify, express, and manage our emotions in healthy ways, we don't have the skills to navigate challenges, to build relationships, to collaborate with others, to work through conflict, to behave ethically and responsibly, not much else matters. It doesn't matter if we're teaching to the test, if our kids aren't coming to school ready and able to learn. And I think that we've seen in the last 14 years that we've been doing this work, a more widespread understanding of the science behind social emotional learning, the neuroscience of emotion, the benefits of mindfulness, and how this impacts all of us. And we're seeing this now more than ever, in this trauma that we're experiencing collectively, that is the pandemic.
Are educators not being taught this in school?
Well, do you mean educators or students?
Educators, when they're going through their schooling to become educators and teachers, is this something that's not really being taught at all, or is it, being taught a little bit more now than it was before?
I think we're making progress and we're seeing more universities and schools of education build in social emotional learning into their curricula, into thinking about what it means to be a teacher. But I can't tell you how many stories we hear from classroom teachers every day who are being awakened to this work, who are learning about what it means to be trauma informed for the first time, who are learning that, a student who is consistently and compulsively dribbling a basketball and will not stop dribbling the basketball, thinking to ask the student, why are you dribbling this basketball? Why won't you stop dribbling the basketball? And hearing from the student, oh, it's because my dad told me I had to get in 1,000 dribbles a day, instead of just the student wanting to be disrespectful and not pay attention, and understanding that and saying, okay, how about we build in moments where you can go into the gym and get, 20 dribbles in, but asking, why are you behaving in this way and how can I support you, as opposed to a more punitive, response. So I think we're making a lot of progress in the field of teacher training, and we're also making a lot of progress in schools. In the last 14 years, it has been very ad hoc. Social emotional learning isn't necessarily taught in schools with consistency. It's not practiced across a school or across a district. There may be some teachers who are really comfortable facilitating a conversation in social emotional learning. There may be some teachers who really are equipped to facilitate a morning meeting. But there are other teachers who may not have had that life experience and who may not want to go there with their students. And so what social emotional learning does is provides an equitable foundation to ensure that all students, regardless of their teacher's comfort level or expertise facilitating this work, or whatever social emotional support they are or are not getting at home, have a consistent foundational opportunity to practice identifying, expressing, and managing their emotions in healthy ways every single day.
Sarah, why isn't that being taught to educators? You said there has been progress, but it seems so important to the students, the well-being of the students, right? So why wouldn't they be taught that in their schooling?
I think there's there are many reasons. I think there's a lot of pressure on schools and on teachers, and there's been a lot of pressure with the legislation around No Child Left Behind and test taking and the focus on academic gains, that it hasn't left much space for us to consider the whole child, to think about why students behave how they behave. I mean, I remember a decade ago sitting down with a chief academic officer whose response to me was, what are we going to do about chronic absenteeism? What are we going to do about rising suspensions and incident reports? And I just looked at him and I said, would you send your kids to these schools? They feel and look like jail cells. And making the connection that when someone greets you, when you walk into a building and says, good morning, with a smile on their face, how are you feeling today? Creating a positive culture, a positive environment where teaching and learning can occur and how that impacts academic gains. I think that there's been so much stress and pressure that schools are pressure cookers with how much we have to achieve in a short amount of time with not a lot of resources and a lot of inherent stress in the profession. And so by not having access to those resources and supports, and for adults to even consider their own social emotional wellness, it's really hard to then have that translate to students.
What are some of the skills students learn from SEL?
They learn to even, for example, identify what they're feeling. So, that feeling of being so stressed and so frustrated, but not being able to put a name to it. So much of
Happens
what
every
it
day.
means. Exactly.
Happens to me every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So much of what it means to be able to manage our emotions in healthy ways starts with identifying what it is that we're feeling specifically and committing to that feeling and owning it and naming it. And that self-awareness is so critical, and recognizing, okay, so when I'm anxious, my heart is racing and my palms are sweaty and my stomach's in knots, and being able to know what that is for you in your body, being able to recognize that in someone else, to see my friend or my teacher or my colleague, because yes, these skills are critical, not just in school, but in life and in work. My colleague is experiencing stress or she's overwhelmed because I'm seeing this behavior, being able to see what that looks like in your body, in your face, being able to communicate that and offer support in healthy ways, being able to build authentic, positive relationships where we can solve problems, where we can collaborate with one another to achieve goals. I mean, these are the critical skills that allow us to, yes, make academic gains, but they're also the skills that allow us to build healthy relationships with siblings, with friends, with colleagues, to lead projects, whether it's in our community, in the workplace. These are the critical skills for success in schoolwork and in life.
How does SEL change as a student grows older?
So the idea of the core competencies that are being cultivated, self-awareness, self-management, for example, relationship skills, social awareness, responsible decision-making, these competencies are consistent from, pre-K all the way to 12th grade, all the way to adult learning. But how the specific skills within those competencies are explored and developed become more nuanced. So we're able to go deeper. I think about it as kind of peeling back layers of an onion, or even the way my 3-year-old eats an apple, where she'll take a bite and then she goes and runs around and then she comes back and takes another bite and she runs around and plays and she goes and take another bite. This idea of we're continuously learning and growing and deepening our practice. We've never arrived. We've never evolved and we say, okay, now I'm going to check the box. I am a certified, emotionally intelligent person, and I don't have to do this work ever again. My husband will joke that, pre-pandemic, I'd be running around and I'd be in the grocery store and I'd be on a conference call and sending an email and someone would bump into me and I would get flustered and he would say, didn't you author a mindfulness, social emotional wellness curriculum? And it's a good reminder that even though this is my life's work and I live it and read about it and think about it and try really hard to practice every day, we still fall off and we still make mistakes, and that this is a journey. And so the way we think about social emotional learning from our youngest learners all the way into high school and in adulthood is that we can deepen our understanding. We can become more vulnerable with others. We can become more honest with ourselves. We can take the skills that we are cultivating and apply them in our lives and in our communities and in our homes in more meaningful ways. So we see in high school more opportunities for civic engagement, more opportunities for exploring social justice issues and taking social action, and what we call global action projects. So providing high school students opportunities to explore problems in their community and come together through project-based learning. So it's really about the same key competencies that are developed throughout our lives, but how deep we go and how authentic we are in the learning journey.
How do you practice SEL on a daily basis?
Well, there's a couple rituals that are pretty critical to my and my family's mental health. One is movement. I have to exercise every day. So either running, spinning, hiking, taking a dance class, a yoga class, but I usually do that first thing in the morning. It's an opportunity for me to clear my head and make sure I get a good sweat in before I'm with my daughters. The other thing that I do before I'm with my daughters is something called the Artist's Way morning pages. So I get up at 5 a.m.
Julia Cameron, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Do you do morning pages?
So I tried doing them and I did them for a while, then I stopped, but I really should go back to doing it because it's great. It's a great way to start the day, really just get everything out there on the papers and then just kind of move on and do what you need to do.
Yeah. So I actually do that before I exercise, very early at like 5 a.m. And that is my opportunity to clear my internal cache, to just write 3 pages of whatever is coming up for me. It could be that, this sun is shining, or I'm tired, or like there's this problem I'm trying to solve for in my organization, or there's this personnel issue. It could be anything, or this is going on with my sister. I mean, I'm just clearing that internal cache that's clouding my ability to create, to have new ideas, to build. And so when I do that, I feel like I am more present for my family. I'm more present for my team. I'm able to generate new ideas because I've just kind of gotten all of the stuff out of the way that's preventing me from functioning at the highest level. So Artist's Way morning pages, movement, like a good sweaty morning exercise, and then a short 10-minute evening meditation. That's really important to kind of bookend my day and allow me to just ground myself prior to unwinding. And I think those are the 3 most critical activities that when I haven't done them, my husband will say to me, I really think you need to go do your morning pages. Like you clearly had a couple mornings where that hasn't happened.
Right.
So to your point of falling off, like, sure, that of course happens, but having him in an accountability partner who knows that these are the activities, these are the wellness rituals I really need to be the best mother, wife, friend, sister, daughter, CEO, entrepreneur. This is what I need.
Sorry, when the pandemic hit, what were some of the major concerns from the SEL community?
Well, when the pandemic hit, I don't even think we began to anticipate what trauma we would be living, because I don't think we even knew at the beginning how long this would be going on. But the idea of schools being closed and that not being a safe space for students to go to is really problematic, because for so many students, schools are the place where they can count on a hot meal, an adult to check in on them, to ask them how they're doing, an adult to kind of screen or proactively prevent or check for warning signs for violent behavior. And that's where many students are receiving mental health services. So for some families, it's not as problematic, but for many, it is. And this idea of schools being closed for so long, and how can teachers, through a screen, connect to their students and build authentic relationships, is a big question that we have been getting. And fortunately, for the way we support schools, we already deliver our content through digital multimedia, video, audio, that can be accessed anywhere. And so what we did is we opened up this content to families so that any family with a student in a Move This World school could now access this at home, recognizing that caregivers need to be able to have access to these supports, that we need to be able to reinforce this common language that's being developed. Because if we don't have the skills to reinforce at the home what's happening in the school, it makes it even more challenging.
And how, when you mentioned that some of the skills at home and the students practicing those skills, what are some ways that teachers can get the students to, um, you know, perhaps, go on your website, look at the material there, keep learning, how to just keep them involved in the program?
So how can teachers learn about Move This World?
No, how can students continuously learn about SEL even when they're home? I know you mentioned that you guys have lots of materials and whatnot for the teachers and the students. So how do teachers really get their students to continue that learning at home?
So students have access at home to all of the Move This World content. So the way the curriculum works is that there is a new exercise that's introduced each day. There's a week's worth of content for 36 weeks of the school year. And each day is an opportunity for me to connect to myself, to connect to those around me, whether that's the people with whom I'm physically sharing space, like my family or extended family, or those through the screen. So if we're learning in a synchronous format where I'm seeing my fellow students and my teacher, or it's asynchronous, we can do that also through the screen and through other sharing tools. So it's about building in opportunities for connection, building in opportunities to practice emotional vocabulary. So remembering it's not, the only options are not just to be sad or happy or angry, that there's a whole nuance of ways that we can feel, and remembering that we also have choices in how we respond to difficult emotions and conflict. And that's where a lot of our key common language comes in. So something that we teach students are the emojers. The emojers are emotion managers that we use whenever we are faced with a difficult situation, and reminding students and adults that we don't have to always respond in our default mechanism of how we typically respond in the face of a challenge or a stressor, but there are other options we have, and that we are empowered to choose how we respond to that stressor. So that's one example of just how the content lives and breathes in the home through the scope and sequence. We also launched an audio network this past fall, recognizing that For our youngest learners, there's a lot of screen fatigue, and we needed to provide opportunities for them to play and to express themselves and to move and to practice social emotional skills. So our audio network launched with a podcast called the Emotion Motion Podcast, really designed for 3 to 8-year-olds and their grown-ups, through 10 to 15-minute episodes, allowing them to practice social emotional learning through play and storytelling. And then another podcast, the Sara Cast, Conversations in Social Emotional Learning, focused more on educators, parents, administrators to really understand the science of social emotional learning and the practice and how this can be implemented either in the home or in the district setting. And then 2 other things that we did in the pandemic, where we launched a COVID-19 mental health resource center where any parent or educator can go to movethisworld.com and access free resources and exercises and videos that can be done at home to support you in this unprecedented time. And then the last thing was we launched a special programming where we brought a couple times a week, I think even at one point, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, these live 3-minute opportunities to facilitate this work wherever you are.
Sara, are you seeing an increase of people visiting your website, using your tools and the content there since the pandemic hit?
Yes, an
Yeah.
exponential increase.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are some of the things you've learned from the pandemic that maybe you didn't know about SEL before, or the way people are learning, or the type of content they need?
I mean, I think there are some beautiful moments of connection that are happening. I mean, we have hear stories of partners. I mean, one principal of a school and one of our partners in Charles County, Maryland, the way she was very similar to what I was doing with special programming. She was delivering these morning announcements now, like from her home for her students, and trying to connect with them that way. We heard stories of a school, one of our partners in Nashville, Tennessee, that was sewing masks for folks who couldn't find masks. So I think the ways that people came together to support one another, to lift each other up, just gave me renewed hope in humanity. I think also the murder of George Floyd at the end of May, that really sparked a racial reckoning in across the board, but specifically in education, and the ways that we need to do a better job strengthening and elevating the work in diversity, equity, and inclusion as a part of social emotional learning, that it's certainly not separate, but this is part of what social emotional learning needs to do. So I think there were some key kind of moments throughout the pandemic so far that have both provided optimism and an opportunity for us to continue to do better when it comes to social emotional learning.
What's next for Move This World? What are some of your key initiatives for 2021?
So we will continue to expand and further differentiate our multimedia content and experiences by grade level, pre-K through 12th grade, and by social emotional learning competency. We will put more explicit focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our content. There's going to be more what we call power of pause content. So this content to support self-awareness and self-management that can be used to cultivate mindfulness whenever you need it, whether you're home, if it's after lunch or at the end of the school day or the work day, or if you are in the building as you transition from recess. We're going to have independent student logins for 6th through 12th graders to allow for a more personalized, asynchronous student experience where they can build their own portfolios of creativity and exploration in social emotional learning. There's going to be improved data reporting in the Move This World platform. There's going to be more opportunities to explicitly cultivate social emotional learning at home. There'll be season 2 of the Emotion Motion podcast this spring, and then the Sara Cast, Conversations in Social Emotional Learning, later this summer, and an expanded team at Move This World to deliver on and accelerate the scale of this very urgent work.
So you got a lot going on then, Sara.
I would say, I'm not sure
Yeah.
what's more, that or my two toddlers.
Right.
Two toddlers in a pandemic.
Yeah. It keeps you very busy. Now, where can people find Move This World if they want to learn more about it?
MoveThisWorld.com. You can access all of the resources I mentioned, the free mental health COVID-19 Resource Center. You can access special programming off our YouTube channel. You can access a collection of diversity, equity, inclusion content off our YouTube channel, some videos that are on our Vimeo channel on our website, but MoveThisWorld.com is a great place to start.
Thanks for joining me on the podcast today, Sara.
Thanks, CJ.